Hey there folks, welcome back to the channel. So we're going to talk about one thing as kind of a follow-up to the video I made the other day regarding Josh Luber doing a box break with backyard breaks, which as I discussed was going to be kind of a controversial thing, which we kind of knew was going to be the case. I want to thank everybody again who took the time to make a comment about it. I did get some great feedback on it and had quite a bit of fun conversation and very interesting conversation as well in relation to it. So it was kind of interesting to see kind of where people's thoughts were going into it, so prior to. Now, one of the things I alluded to on the video was that we didn't know if the situation was a case of where the Josh Luber and the Fanatics folks just hadn't done their vetting and checked into kind of the sketchy history with backyard breaks and a lot of the questionable things that they've been involved with. And or if they did do some vetting into it, did some research into it, and decided that they could live with whatever blowback or response they were going to get. Now, here I'm showing on the screen a post from CardPorn on Instagram. And again, as usual, I'll include links to whatever I'm going to refer to in the description for you. If you want to check it out yourself, you certainly can. So bottom line, and I'm going to be very clear about this. Whenever we're looking at something along this line where we're taking screenshots that are not directly involving the individual involved, it's different to me than if a situation where somebody asks it themselves. And I'll use the example of Rattle Pokemon, where Rattle Pokemon has done some stuff in terms of some videos where they've reached out to some folks and then included screenshots of the conversation they had with the individual. It's a little different when somebody else provides you third-hand screenshots of a conversation back and forth. In this case, the conversations are kind of short. It's just a quick exchange. We don't know if there's more to it. We don't know if there's additional context. So that's why I'm putting all those caveats into it. And I'm saying, we'll take it at face value. We're not going to put too much stock into it, but we're also not going to discount it entirely because there's a good likelihood that there's a little bit of truth to it. But again, whenever you're taking a piece of a conversation out of context, you always got to bear that in mind. However, the two different screen grabs they included in here seem to suggest that at some level Josh Luber had at least an understanding of it. So I'll read you a certain couple of pieces here, and then we'll get into it. So basically, this is presumably from Josh Luber responding to this person, saying, what do you think the video shows? The video being an example of one of those videos breaking down some of Backyard Break's previous issues, some of the things they've done with them in the past. So they say here, they mark certain cards and breaks, so there's a specific video pertaining to this. I don't recall if I included any information to that. If not, I'll try to find the video and include that one in the description for you as well. Shady things that have happened with them in the past. And the response here, presumably from this Josh Luber account, which again has the verification check mark, so again, take it with a grain of salt. This video is nothing at all. I've gone deep to understand the claims, and to be honest, it's comical. Whoever made the video should be ashamed. As to the Trevor Lawrence issue, we've also gone deep on that and feel confident that there is no wrongdoing. So again, suggesting that they've done their vetting. They could have been more clear in how they explained what was happening, but they more than made up for that confusion with the people that matter, i.e. the people in the chat that day. We have spent time with the guys personally, and they're just some guys hustling, working very hard, doing great things for their community. Do they have a style that some people dislike? Absolutely. But I'm not a personal fan of that type of content, but a lot of people are, and it's really that simple. So that was one exchange that wasn't captured here, and the other one was very similar to that, kind of pertaining to the same idea. Saying, why do you say that? What have they done? Do you know for a fact they've done this behavior? Also, how much time have you spent with them personally? So both of them kind of allude to, well, we've talked to them, therefore that is enough for us. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't watch the live stream in question. I did catch a couple of minutes of it. Originally I was going to grab a couple of screenshots. I do have them. So it's one of those things where I may, well, let me see actually. If I happen to have it, I'll pull it up. Otherwise, it won't be on the screen. But I did grab a couple of screenshots initially, but I didn't see too much that I thought was worthwhile. Well, actually, maybe I do have one here that I can share with you. Okay, so here we go. So here's one. There we go. Hopefully that comes up on the screen for you. So I did capture that, and I don't believe they kept an archive of this, so I wasn't able to go back and kind of check out and listen to some of the conversation with Josh Luber. So you can see Luber there with the backwards cap over here, and then obviously the breakers are doing their thing. It is a 2013 Prism break, and that was what they were doing as far as that piece is concerned on Twitch and on whatnot. So there it is, and as you can see that at the time this was recording, this was already 2.5 hours in, and they still had over 1,000 views as far as that's concerned. So, like I said, Josh Luber did go through with it, and they did it. I did catch bits and pieces that seemed to suggest that they had a couple of conversations pertaining to breaking and a couple of different things. The bottom line is Luber decided to do it. But, of course, that leaves a very strong reaction with a lot of folks. Now, the CardPorn account here, as far as these postings, are kind of interesting in the sense that you get a lot of support for backyard breaks that use a lot of the same verbiage that could very well be bot accounts. Again, that is simply my conjecture, just based on what I was looking at, seeing the same verbiage over and over and over again. But we do know that backyard breaks do have a pretty loyal following in the sense that people tune into their stuff and somebody's buying into these breaks. So one way or the other, however you want to slice it, they are getting the attention. And despite, again, all the misgivings and all the wrongdoings that they've been accused of, some people still seem content to send them money. I leave it to you again just to think about that. And Josh Luber, in this sense, kind of gave them almost like a stamp of approval. Now, one point that was made where Josh Luber's questioned us a little bit is that he stated in various ways that he went on because they asked him. So it's one of those things where, in this case, it seems to be that he had vetted them, and that they accepted the explanation for the various misgivings that some people had, because people did reach out prior to, basically suggesting, hey, you might not want to, give a tacit endorsement to these guys by appearing there and giving them some additional credibility. But he ended up doing it anyway. Now, that's the first part of it. And that's really as straightforward as it gets. You can decide for yourself kind of where you stand on that, and I'll ask you at the end kind of what your thoughts are based on where we are now. Again, taking it with a grain of salt, this additional piece of information, does it change your opinion in any way, shape, or form if in fact Josh Luber and the team over Fanatics did have at least some understanding of some of the sketchier paths of backyard breaks? Again, based on what you think about backyard breaks, that may be like an absolute deal breaker for you, because I know some folks in the comments tried to leave a little bit of an olive branch open, saying, hey, if they're going to do some shenanigans, you might not want to be involved in that, etc., etc. Well, in this case, it appears that they at least had some understanding of what they were doing going into it. Now, I do want to kind of take a little bit of a twist on this one, and I want to kind of point something out, because Sports Card Radio, actually in one of their most recent videos, and I've talked about Sports Card Radio in the past, and a lot of times they go between two different realms, the way I like to put it. They'll have these videos that have really good information, and then they'll have some where they do kind of lean into the clickbait side of things and do kind of like to run right up against the edge, and for a lot of folks cross that line and go over the edge. So I'll leave it to you how you feel about Sports Card Radio. I will say that when they focus a video on trying to pull a certain piece of information and trying to dig into it, and using some of their past reporting on their website and through other sources to be able to talk through some of these things, they are able to provide some insights in some of these videos. So I'll probably grab a link to it for you and include it in the description for you as well, where it talks a little bit about Josh Luber specifically as pertaining to getting himself involved in this. And this was prior to the actual live stream. But one quick point I want to make for you as pertains to that is one of the points he makes, and he puts in a question, which I think is fair, is he asks, does Josh Luber's business acumen, should we really be impressed with him? Obviously, part of the whole deal is that Josh Luber was coming in with Fanatics and all this, and it all kind of gets lumped in together. Should we be impressed with Josh Luber, and in turn, should we be impressed with where Fanatics is going, coming out of the blocks with a lot of the stuff they're doing? But here's where I'm going to kind of extend it a little bit further, and I'm going to kind of make a point about this, and I want to kind of, hopefully you'll kind of understand where I'm going with it, and you can follow with me here. And I'm going to pose you a question at the end of it, because I'm curious what you think about this as well. So the first question is kind of how you feel about the collaboration in the first place, given that there's a likelihood that he kind of knew what he was getting into going into it and decided to still do it. And the second part will be kind of playing into this other idea that I want to bring up. Whether you think he's a good businessman or not, let's talk about a different aspect of this. So what I want to do here is I actually pulled up the collector's leadership, kind of leadership page on their website. I know we're talking about Fanatics, but stick with me here for a second. I want to use this as an example. So when we're looking at collectors from the sports card landscape perspective, we're thinking about PSA. Now, we do know that Collectors is actually a larger company that does own some other things, because if you scroll down here through the leadership, you've got Stephanie Sabin here, who's president of PCGS, which is the coin grading side of it, which has been around for a long time. And then, of course, we do have Kevin Lenane, who's president of PSA. This is important, and I'll get to a point that I want to make about Josh Luber, so I'll bring it back into him in a second. Now, obviously, on the board of directors, we do have Nat Turner, and in addition, also, don't forget Stephen Cohen as part of the board of directors as well. So there's a lot of folks up there involved in management as part of that group that came in to buy it. Now, going back to the management page, of course, we do have Nat Turner here, who is the chief executive officer. So he's the CEO. But this is the point that I wanted to make, and I'm going to bring it over into Fanatics now. When a lot of us are thinking about anything pertaining to PSA, and people want to complain about PSA or praise PSA or whatever they're going to do, a lot of times they'll kind of fixate, often, not all the time, but a lot of times they will fixate on Nat Turner, because Nat Turner is the most visible face of kind of this acquisition of collectors and the current iteration of PSA. However, if we really kind of pull back a second to think about this, that's why I wanted to show you this page. There's a bunch of different folks who are operating different sections. This is a larger company. This isn't just PSA. There's an overarching company. And Nat Turner is CEO of Collectors, not CEO of PSA. He obviously has a stake in it as a person who does collect cards in terms of being front visible, answering questions pertaining to, and being a part of it. But at the end of the day to day, the buck stops with Kevin Lenane over here, president of PSA, because he's the one currently in charge of that section of the company. It is a large company. There's these different divisions and these different groups, but Kevin Lenane is the main guy for the PSA side of things. And obviously, the same way that Stephanie Sabin over here is PCGS. Same idea. Same concept. And of course, you've got some other folks that were around from the previous regime who are still around doing various capacities and various jobs within the bigger organization. So don't try to think of it as this one specific thing that's just PSA. It is a larger corporation that does other things. But it's kind of the point that I'm making is that's kind of an interesting way that we've taken to kind of fixating in on it. Where Nat Turner obviously has an interest in what's going on with PSA, but he also has responsibilities that extend beyond just focusing in on the day-to-day of what's going on at PSA. Day-to-day, Kevin Linnane probably has a better handle on exactly what's going on in that segment of the business, as opposed to Nat Turner, who needs to be looking at it at more of a 50,000-foot view, instead of maybe a 1,000-foot view or even closer to the ground. So that's kind of something to bear in mind. Now, bringing it over to Fanatics, let's talk about that. So here's the Fanatics leadership page. Now, you got Josh Luber here, co-founder and chief visionary officer, which is something we've discussed before on the live stream and on the channel, which is kind of an interesting little title. It's not a CEO, but, it sort of, I guess, plays into it. It is kind of interesting. But I want to kind of bring your attention over to Jeff Gordon here, the long-forgotten son of Raleigh Fingers. An interesting mustache choice, but very amusing. But anyway, he is the chief operating officer at Fanatics Collectibles. So here's the question that I wanted to bring to you. The first part of it was talking about Josh Luber choosing to go over to visit the Backyard Breaks guys. Josh Luber, for all intents and purposes, is the front-facing person of the Fanatics sports card side of the business. Because don't forget, Fanatics is a larger company as well that does other things. Michael Rubin is the overall boss, the head honcho of the overall Fanatics, because we've also got merchandising and a bunch of other things they do. But in the sports card side of it, the Fanatics Collectibles segment of it, these are the guys we're looking at. A lot of people aren't going to know Dave Goldberg, the Chief Technology Officer, necessarily for Fanatics Collectibles. But as far as I know, I haven't seen anything pertaining to Jeff Gordon here, Chief Operating Officer. Now, this is the question I posed to you. Obviously, Josh Luber is the front face. He is the one we look at. And any critique and criticism of any appearances or anything he says or anything he does in representing Fanatics Collectibles is obviously going to be looked at with a microscope. But here's my question. Just like I used that collector's example a minute ago. While we might look at Nat Turner and think, hey, Nat, what's going on with PSA? He might have an idea, because obviously he's in touch. He needs to know what's going on. But he has a bigger portfolio than just the PSA side of things. So here's my question. Obviously, Josh Luber does have involvement. Obviously, he has a lot of ideas and things he wants to implement and things he wants to do. Obviously, he had a big hand in building out that Zero Cool thing. As a question I would pose to you, is there a real possibility that with a chief operating officer in place and other folks down the line and down the chain, with the acquisition of Topps and inheriting their management team and middle management, whatever they have going on as far as their own infrastructure, what is the likelihood that Josh Luber is really going to be involved necessarily in the day-to-day operation of the actual trading card side of the thing? Because he has a personal interest in the whole entertainment side of it, what Zero Cool does, because that's kind of his passion project. So I could see him having pretty hands-on as far as that piece is concerned. I could see him having a lot of hands-on as far as being the front-facing person. But the question is, if I'm talking about day-to-day operations, am I more likely to understand where Fanatics Collectibles is going to go going forward by looking at the person on the far left? Or should I be looking at the person there in the middle with the interesting mustache? This isn't meant as anything more than just an open question. Because this is kind of the interesting part about a lot of these businesses in this space. Since we're not used to a lot of these big businesses, and since, as I mentioned in the first video, we're accustomed to a lot of the biggest people in the space being so available, and so, you just reach out to them and then you can ask them questions and this, that, and the other thing, and they're accessible. We forget that these are companies. These are companies that are of sufficient size that we need to have a chief operating officer. Fanatics is not a mom and pop shop. And even the Fanatics Collectibles side of it is not a mom and pop shop either. They need a lot of moving parts to make this go. There's a real likelihood, like I said, that any concern you might have about Josh Luber, or any concern you might have about his leadership, his vision, or whatever you want to put into it, there's a bigger likelihood that the people that are actually doing the business day to day, the people that are still working at Topps, who carried over from the past, there's a likelihood that while something like Zero Cool can be wacky and off the wall and try a bunch of different things, and they may incorporate some elements of that into the Topps product in future, there's a real likelihood as well that a lot of it will be stay the course. So it's going to be interesting. Like I said, we always have these strong visceral reactions, but what is interesting to me is that there's a real likelihood that a lot of it's just going to be like, what Topps flagship is going to look like next year? Kind of the same as this year. I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't exactly reinvent the wheel on that product and on a bunch of other products that you're used to and accustomed to. It'll just be a matter of getting them out on time and whatever logistics are involved in that. They may print more, they may print less, they may adjust certain things in certain aspects of it, they may introduce some new products and drop some old products. But the likelihood is you're going to see more of a glacial move. It's not going to be this sudden weird turn on a dime. So it's kind of interesting to see that obviously the emotional response to something like collaborating even temporarily with Backyard Breakers and how people feel about that is then projected very much onto Josh Luber and the front-facing individuals, while the folks that are actually doing the real business day to day necessarily are the ones we don't hear about and the ones we don't know about. Because I don't know what Jeff Gordon has in mind. I don't know what he does day to day. Chief Operating Officer can mean quite a number of things. But that's one of those things. I'd be really interested to hear what the person in the middle has to say and what their day to day looks like and what they're doing as far as working, moving a lot of these things forward. And there's likelihood that there's a couple of folks underneath them in the organizational chart that are probably sitting there making decisions day to day that are going to impact what it's going to look like for you as a person who may have interest in new product going forward in the future. That's why I say, sometimes it's good to take a step back for a second and look at the bigger picture. But here's the thing. That does not mean that Josh Luber's decisions are above critique. The fact is, in that first segment, the first little section they're talking about it, in my opinion, it was a bad decision. I do think kind of aligning yourself and showing yourself with some folks that do have some question marks on them is probably not the best idea long term. But I also don't think it's this crippling blow, because I've seen a lot of comments and folks that talk about it that then, took this to mean that, Fanatics is taking us down the wrong path. It's like, Josh Luber is Josh Luber. He has obviously a prominent role in this Fanatics collectibles, but Josh Luber is not Fanatics. Fanatics is the larger company. He will have a say in some of the stuff that's going on going forward, but some of the people that are underneath, some of the people, like I said, to the right of this picture, are also going to have a say in what this early stage of this Fanatics collectibles becomes. Because some of the decisions they make are going to have some down-the-line consequences, but you may not necessarily have known who they were prior to this video. But it's on the website. It's always been here. It's one of those things that you kind of got to understand. These organizations at a certain size, at a certain level, there's a lot of moving parts that we never get to see because we're very much fixated on the person on the left. So, like I said, it is still open to critique. It is still open to criticism and anything you feel is appropriate, because at the same time, we can only understand what we hear, and the only person whose voice we hear usually is Josh Luber. So what he says, we have to take, with the appropriate amount of weight. But I feel like that as we go forward and go further in time, we're going to find out that he is a part and will have a say. But I don't think he'll be the only voice in the room, and that's what is going to make it interesting. So I don't know what that's going to look like going forward in the future. So maybe my second question to you here at the very end, as I wind down, is going to be like, knowing, like I said, the visceral reaction you maybe had at the first part of this video, and understanding that there is a bigger organization now. So do you think, are we very much going to go with the vision of whatever it is Josh Luber goes into? And if that's the case, do you feel like it's good, bad, or indifferent? Kind of where do you stand on it? I'd be kind of curious what your take is on that. Like I said, right now, I have to take a bit of an even keel. I can still critique the decision to even associate with Backyard Breakers. I think it was a bad idea. I think it shows some poor judgment, and if they did vet it and they decided to go through with it, again, I'll take it with a grain of salt, what we got a chance to see a little earlier. If they did, I do believe that's a bad decision. But I don't think it's a crippling decision. And there'll be plenty of opportunities to make plenty of more bad decisions and make some good ones, and it may all kind of wash out in the end. But that's one of those kind of things that we'll have to leave to see what happens going next. Because, like I said, when they did purchase Topps, they did inherit some management there. And because I believe at least some of them stuck around, they're probably going to have a say too in what this is going to look like going forward in the future. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the stuff is not dramatically different from what you're used to, at least in the short term. A couple of years down the road, it may be a different story, but we'll have to see. So I just opened what your thoughts are. I'd be kind of curious where your head's at as far as this is concerned. I just wanted to have this as the follow-up, since they did finally have the break this past weekend, and we can kind of see what the fallout is going forward, and if there are any other missteps or any other good decisions along the way as we go forward into future years under this Fanatics overlordship, if you will. Anyway, that's it for me for now. Any thoughts or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section. I'll try to reply to as many of them as I can. More videos coming up on the channel and live streams. This upcoming Friday, we'll be doing the live stream at 8 p.m. We'll be doing the earlier time again for this week, and then we'll figure out what it looks like in coming weeks. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.